The rain in London does not just fall, it bites. It carries the chill of the North Sea and the indifference of a city that has seen 1,000 tragedies, yet none quite like mine. I sat on the frozen, grease-stained cobblestones of a narrow alleyway, my bare skin pressed against the filth. Across from me, standing under the shelter of a designer umbrella, was Eleanor Thorne, the woman I had called mother for 5 long years. She did not look at me with pity. Nay, she looked at me with the same disgust one might reserve for a stray dog. She pointed a manicured finger at a sodden pile of cardboard and rotting household waste in the corner. "That is where you belong," she sneered, her voice cutting through the howl of the wind. "That is your new throne. Let us see if some beggar is desperate enough to pick you up. My name is Isabella Montgomery. I am 27 years old. For 5 years, I lived a lie. I traded my crown for a kitchen apron and my legacy for a man I thought loved me. But to understand how the granddaughter of the most powerful man in England ended up half naked in the mud, we must go back 60 minutes. 1 hour. That was all it took for my entire world to incinerate. The air in our Kensington penthouse was usually thick with the scent of lilies and expensive wax, but tonight, it smelled like betrayal. It began with a sound I will never forget, the sharp, stinging crack of Julian Thorne's hand across my face. The force sent me reeling, my shoulder slamming into the marble fireplace. I looked up, my vision blurring, to see the man I had adored standing over me. His eyes, once warm with promises, were now twin voids of ice. "Sign them," he barked, throwing a stack of legal documents onto my lap. I did not need to read them to know what they were. Divorce papers. "Julian, please," I whispered, my voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "What is happening?" "I love you. We can fix this." He let out a hollow, terrifying laugh. "Love? You were a means to an end, Isabella, a temporary ornament. But you are a broken one. You cannot even provide me with an heir. You are a useless, hollow shell." Those words were more agonizing than the blow to my face. For years, I had endured the quiet jabs about our struggle to conceive, but tonight, the mask was gone. Behind him stood Serena, my sister-in-law. She was not offering help. She held her phone high, the lens focused on my tear-streaked face. "Get closer, Julian," she giggled, her voice dripping with malice. "This is going to go viral. The title should be The Pathetic Fall of the Golden Girl." It was a performance, a carefully choreographed execution. Julian lunged forward, grabbing the collar of my silk nightgown. He did not lead me, he dragged me. My knees scraped against the hardwood, and my screams echoed off the high ceilings I had spent years decorating. He threw open the heavy oak doors of the apartment and hauled me toward the service elevator. The cold air of the hallway hit me, but it was nothing compared to the frost in his heart. "Julian, stop. Think about what you are doing," I begged, clutching at his arms. He ignored me, his grip tightening until I thought my scalp would tear. He did not stop at the lobby. He dragged me out into the biting rain of the alleyway behind the building. The world was dark, illuminated only by a single flickering street lamp. Julian looked at me one last time, a smirk of cruel delight on his lips. "You want to know what you are worth to me? Nothing." Then, with a violent twist of his hands, he ripped the silk from my body. The fabric shrieked as it tore, leaving me exposed to the freezing wind and their malevolent laughter. Serena clicked the camera shutter over and over, the flash blinding me as I tried to cover myself with my bruised arms. Julian threw my handbag into the puddle beside me, the contents spilling into the grime. "Never show your face near my family again," he snarled. The heavy steel door slammed shut, and the bolt clicked into place. I was alone. The silence that followed was deafening. The rain soaked through my hair and chilled my bones until I could no longer feel my fingers. I looked at the pile of trash Eleanor had pointed to. In their eyes, I was garbage. I was a failure. I was a woman with nothing. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten who I was before I became Julian Thorne's wife. I crawled through the mud toward my shattered phone. The screen was a web of cracks, but the backlight flickered to life. My fingers were numb, almost unresponsive, as I swiped through the contacts I had ignored for half a decade. I stopped at a name I had promised never to call unless I was at the very edge of existence. I pressed the icon. The ringing felt like a heartbeat. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then a voice as steady as an ancient oak filled my ear. "Montgomery residence. How may I assist you?" Henderson, I choked out, my voice breaking into a sob. It is me. It is Bella. There was a sharp intake of breath. Miss Isabella? Where are you? Tell me your location immediately. His voice, usually so composed, was sharp with panic. I gave him the address of the alleyway behind the Thorn building. Please, I whispered. Come get me. Hold on, Miss Isabella. Do not move. We are coming. I dropped the phone and curled into a ball, my forehead resting on the cold pavement. The minutes felt like centuries. The wind howled through the buildings like a wounded beast, mocking my misery. I felt my consciousness slipping, the hypothermia beginning to take hold. I thought about the 5 years I had wasted, the sacrifices I had made for a man who did not even view me as human. I thought about the smirk on Eleanor's face. Then the darkness of the alley was shattered. A brilliant white light cut through the rain. It was followed by the low, rhythmic thrum of high-performance engines. One black Bentley glided into the narrow space, then another, and another. A fleet of 5 vehicles, obsidian and gleaming despite the rain, boxed in the entire alleyway. The doors opened in perfect unison. A dozen men in sharp black suits stepped out, forming a wall of muscle and steel between me and the world. From the lead car, a man with silver hair and an impeccably tailored coat stepped out. Mr. Henderson. He did not care about the mud or the grease. He ran to me, falling to his knees and wrapping a heavy, warm cashmere coat around my trembling frame. His eyes were filled with a fatherly fury I had never seen. Miss Isabella, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You are safe now. The chairman is waiting. I looked back at the towering Thorn penthouse, the lights still glowing in their windows. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had thrown a beggar into the trash. As Henderson lifted me into the back of the lead car, the leather smelling of home and safety, I felt something new ignite within me. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened steel. They did not realize that by throwing me out, they had released the lioness. The Montgomery heiress had returned, and I would not rest until the Thorn family was buried under the very trash they tried to claim was my home. The iron gates of the Montgomery estate in Surrey swung open like the jaws of a silent giant, welcoming me back into a world I had abandoned for the sake of a lie. The drive up the gravel path was flanked by ancient oaks that seemed to bow in recognition, their branches heavy with the weight of centuries. Inside the car, the air was warm, smelling of polished wood and expensive leather, yet I remained frozen, huddled beneath the cashmere coat Henderson had wrapped around my bruised body. When the car came to a halt before the manor, the heavy oak doors opened to reveal a figure that represented the only stability I had left in this world. My grandfather, Arthur Montgomery, stood at the top of the marble steps, leaning heavily on his ebony cane. I expected judgment. I expected a lecture on the 5 years of silence I had given him while I chased a ghost of a life in London. Instead, as I stumbled out of the car, he simply opened his arms. There were no questions, no told-you-so moments, just the steady rhythmic beat of a heart that had never stopped loving me. You are home, Isabella, he whispered into my hair, and the world will bleed for what they have done to you. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and revelation. While my physical wounds healed in the soft light of my childhood bedroom, my soul was being forged in a furnace of cold fury. I did not want rest. I wanted the truth. I spent hours in the library with Henderson, diving into the labyrinth of financial records that compose the Thorn family legacy. What I found did more than break my heart. It incinerated every remaining memory of my marriage. Julian had always presented himself as the quintessential self-made man, a visionary who had built an empire from nothing but grit and ambition. It was a masterpiece of fiction. In reality, Julian Thorn was a parasite. As I scrolled through the digital ledgers, the patterns became clear. For the duration of our 5-year marriage, Julian had been systematically siphoning millions of dollars from the secret trust fund my late parents had established for my protection. He had bypassed the security measures through a complex web of shell companies, effectively using my own inheritance to fund his lavish lifestyle and his failing business ventures. The realization was a physical blow. While he sat across from me at dinner, telling me I was a burden, a useless woman who brought nothing to the table, he was living off my blood. He had gaslighted me into a state of perpetual apology. making me feel small and indebted to his generosity, while he was the one stealing the very ground from beneath my feet. He was not a king. He was a thief in a tailored suit. But the financial fraud was only the beginning of the rot. As Henderson presented the surveillance reports, the full scope of Julian's betrayal came into focus. It was not just a simple story of a cheating husband seeking fleeting pleasure. It was an orchestrated campaign of social climbing fueled by infidelity. I saw the photographs of Julian with 3 different women, each chosen for the power she possessed. There was Clara, the socialite whose connections opened the doors to London's elite circles. There was Diane, a high-stakes chief executive officer who provided him with insider information to keep his fraudulent companies afloat. And then there was Sophie, the daughter of a prominent politician, whom he was grooming to secure government contracts. He had used these women as rungs on a ladder, treading on their hearts and mind to reach a summit he did not deserve. The man I had loved for 5 years never existed. He was a ghost, a hollow vessel filled with nothing but greed. I sat back in the heavy leather chair, the glow of the computer screen reflecting in my eyes. The tears had finally stopped, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade. Julian thought he had thrown away a broken woman, but he had actually awakened a sleeping empire. He had used my money, my heart, and my name to build his house of cards. Now, I was going to be the wind that blew it all down. This was no longer about a divorce. This was about a total and absolute reckoning. He wanted to climb the ladder of power, but he had forgotten one thing. I owned the mountain. I shed my skin like a serpent preparing for a hunt. The reflection in the full-length mirror was no longer a ghost of a girl broken by the rain. I cut my hair into a sharp, dark bob that grazed my jawline like a blade. I traded the rags of my marriage for tailored suits that felt like armor. Every morning, I woke at 4 a.m. to the sound of my own ambition. My grandfather sat across from me in the boardroom, his eyes gleaming with pride as I absorbed 5 years of lost knowledge in 5 weeks. I was no longer Isabella the victim. I was the vice chair of the Montgomery Group, a woman forged in betrayal and tempered by ice. The boardrooms of London were my new territory, and I moved through them with a predatory grace that left my competitors breathless. I was not just reclaiming a title, I was reclaiming my soul. The vengeance began in the shadows. I did not want a messy, loud divorce that would satisfy the tabloids. I wanted a total eclipse of his existence. I established Apex Holdings, a ghost of a corporation with no face and no mercy. Through this shell, I moved with silent, surgical precision. Julian Thorne's company was drowning in $14 million of debt, gasping for air as creditors circled like vultures. I did not wait for the end. I bought his debt. Every loan, every mortgage, every cent he owed was now held in my hand. I became his invisible master, the secret hand that could crush his heart with a single phone call. He was building a house of cards on the edge of a cliff, and I owned the wind. The day I walked back into the Kensington penthouse, the air felt thin and stale. Julian stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by boxes and the stench of cheap scotch. He looked like a man who had seen his own grave. When he turned and saw me, his jaw dropped. I was radiant, dressed in a white suit that cost more than his monthly rent, standing tall and untouchable. "Bella," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Thank God you are here. I am in trouble. The bank, this company called Apex, they are taking everything. Please, tell your grandfather to help me. I can make it up to you. I can love you again." I watched him crawl toward me, his hands reaching for the hem of my jacket. I stepped back, my gaze as cold as a winter grave. "I am not here to rescue you, Julian," I said, my voice steady and crystalline. "I am here to tell you that the debt is due. You wanted to play the king on someone else's throne. Now, you will learn what it feels like to have no ground beneath your feet." I left him trembling in the wreckage of his pride, but my work was far from over. I sought out the 3 women Julian had used as ladders. We met in a private room at an exclusive club, the tension thick enough to cut. They expected a rival, a woman scorned seeking a fight. Instead, I gave them the truth. I laid the evidence of his husband's infidelity and financial fraud on the table like a deck of cards. I showed them how he had played us all against each other, profiting from our silence and our trust. I did not see them as enemies. I saw them as sisters in the same war. We are not pawns, I told them, my voice ringing with a newfound power. We are the architects of his downfall. That night, I did not just build a case. I built an army. The silent predator was no longer alone. The trap was set, the shadows were closing in, and Julian Thorne had no idea that the very women he trampled were now the ones holding the match. My heart was a drum, beating with the rhythm of a coming storm, and I knew that when it finally broke, there would be nothing left of the Thorne family but dust and regret. I had been his silent shadow for 5 years. Now, I was the one who would cast him into the dark. The explosion did not come from a bomb, but from the truth. I sat in a high-stakes television studio, the cold blue lights illuminating the sharp lines of my face as I looked directly into the camera lens. I was no longer the silent victim of a Kensington penthouse. I was the voice of a reckoning. I spoke with a voice like sharpened glass, detailing the 5 years of broken trust and the intricate web of financial scams the Thorne family had woven. I laid bare the $14 million in debt, the fraudulent trust fund transfers, and the systematic abuse that Julian and his mother had used to fuel their hollow ambitions. The reaction was instantaneous. By the time I stepped out of the studio, the name Thorne was being scrubbed from every boardroom and social circle in London. They were pariahs, their carefully constructed facade reduced to ashes by the heat of the truth. But as the public turned on them, a darker, more primitive fire began to burn in the heart of Eleanor Thorne. A cornered beast does not ask for mercy, it strikes. I received the call at 3 p.m, a voice crackling with a terrifying, jagged madness. It was Eleanor. She did not want to negotiate. She had taken the one thing I valued more than my life, my grandfather. If you want to see Arthur Montgomery breathe another word, she hissed, her voice a serrated blade, you will come to the derelict shipyard on the Thames. Bring the transfer codes for the Montgomery fortune, or I will watch him burn. My heart stopped for a single, agonizing beat, but I did not crumble. I contacted Henderson and the elite police units, orchestrating a silent, lethal response while I drove through the London fog toward the skeletal remains of the shipyard. The air at the shipyard smelled of salt, rust, and the suffocating stench of gasoline. I stepped into the hollowed-out hull of an old freighter, the shadows dancing under the flicker of a single swinging light. My grandfather was tied to a steel post, his face bruised but his gaze still fierce. Eleanor stood before him, her hair wild and her eyes twin pits of psychotic rage. She held a red gasoline canister in one hand and a gold lighter in the other. You destroyed my legacy, Isabella, she screamed, her voice echoing off the metal walls. You took everything. Now, I will take the only thing you have left. She raised the lighter, the thumb ready to strike. I stood my ground, my pulse a frantic drum in my ears, waiting for the signal. Just as the flame flickered to life, the world exploded. Flashbangs shattered the darkness, and the rhythmic thud of tactical boots filled the air. Henderson burst through the side entrance, his silenced weapon drawn, as a dozen officers swarmed the freighter. The lighter flew from Eleanor's hand as she was tackled to the oil-slicked floor. She did not go quietly. She screamed about her lost empire and her divine right to the Montgomery wealth, her voice trailing off into a pathetic wail as the steel handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. I ran to my grandfather, my hands trembling as I sliced through his bonds. I held him tightly, the tears finally breaking through my armor as the weight of the terror evaporated into the cold night air. The fall was total. Eleanor was hauled away, her madness now a matter of public record. Julian and Serena were intercepted at the airport, their bags packed with stolen jewelry and forged passports, only to be met by a wall of blue uniforms. They were implicated in every layer of the financial crimes, their greed finally providing the evidence for their own destruction. The family that had thrown me out like a pile of trash was now headed for a cold gray prison cell, their name a synonym for disgrace. As I stood on the banks of the Thames, watching the sunrise bleed across the water, I felt a deep, resonant peace. The thorns were gone. My legacy was secure, and for the first time in 5 years, I could finally breathe. The dust has finally settled on the ruins of the Thorne family, and in its place, a quiet, steady peace has taken root. Healing was not a sudden event, but a slow, rhythmic mending of a soul that had been torn apart. Throughout the legal fires and the public storms, one man remained a constant, unshakable pillar. Gabriel Vance was more than just the brilliant legal mind who dismantled Julian Thorne's empire. He was the first person who saw the woman beneath the heiress. Our love did not burn with the frantic, deceptive heat of my youth. It blossomed with the warmth of an autumn sun, grounded in respect and truth. We married on a secluded stretch of the Cornwall coast, far from the prying eyes of the city. There were no flashing cameras or fake smiles. Just the roar of the ocean, the scent of salt, and a vow spoken from a place of absolute clarity. As Gabriel took my hand, I realized that my first marriage was a prison, but this was a homecoming. But life had one final secret to surrender. While clearing out a long-forgotten cedar chest in the attic of the Montgomery estate, I found a weathered, leather-bound diary. It belonged to my mother. As I turned the yellowed pages, the breath left my lungs. The diary revealed a truth more haunting than any financial scam. My mother and Eleanor Thorne had once been inseparable best friends. They had shared dreams and secrets, but beneath the surface, a poison had been brewing. Eleanor had harbored a deep, toxic jealousy of my mother's wealth, her grace, and the Montgomery legacy. When my mother died, Eleanor did not feel grief. She felt an opportunity for a twisted, delayed revenge. She had orchestrated my misery, pushing Julian toward me and fueling the fire of my humiliation as a way to finally trample the woman she could never outshine. She had targeted me because I was the living reflection of everything she had envied. Seeing it written in my mother's gentle script was a final, devastating blow, yet it provided a closure I did not know I needed. The ghost of Eleanor Thorne was finally exorcised from my mind. Her malice was not about my failure, it was about her own insecurity. I chose not to let that poison define me. I took the settlement money and the remnants of the Thorne assets and transformed them into a beacon of hope. I founded the Montgomery Sanctuary, a charity dedicated to protecting women escaping the suffocating grip of domestic and financial abuse. I watched as thousands of women walked through our doors, their eyes filled with the same terror I once carried. And I saw them emerge with the strength I had fought so hard to reclaim. My story was no longer just a tragic tale shared on digital forums or whispered in social circles. It had become a testament to the sheer, unyielding power of resilience. I realized that the pain Julian inflicted on me was the very fire that forged the shield I now use to protect others. As I stand on the terrace of our home, watching Gabriel walk through the gardens with my grandfather, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Arthur Montgomery looks 10 years younger, his laughter echoing against the stone walls as he watches the sunset. The wind no longer carries the bite of that London alleyway. It carries the scent of lavender and the promise of tomorrow. I look down at my hands, no longer trembling, but firm and capable. The storm is over. The ashes of my past have not just been swept away. They have provided the rich, dark soil for a beautiful and authentic future. I was once a girl who believed she was trash, but I have learned that even the most broken pieces can be used to build a palace of iron and light. I am Isabella Montgomery Vance, and I am finally, irrevocably free.